Hello and welcome. We're doing Lunch and Learn, the Queens of Crime. I'm Michelle, one of your librarians, and next to me is...
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm one of the programmers at the Porter Library.
Hi, and I'm Joy. I'm one of the programmers at the Howell Library. And we're going to be talking to you about the Queens of Crime. And you probably want to know, well, who are the Queens of Crime? So the origin of the designation Queens of Crime is unknown. They began talking about the Queens of Crime in the golden age of detective fiction, which we will go into a little bit later. And there have been arguments about who should be included. So Dorothy L. Sayers and Agatha Christie are considered absolute definite Queens of Crime. Most writers have chosen Allingham and Marsh as well. One of the reasons being that each one of them had a year in which 1 million copies of their books were sold. And so they are considered also Queens of Crime. Some thought Marsh, Nao Marsh is her name. She's from New Zealand. And Marjorie Allingham, some thought Marsh should not be included because she was not British. But other people said no, because she writes British detective fiction. Some other possible additions would include Josephine Tay, whose first novels were written during the Golden Age, but her later works were after the Golden Age ended. Gladys Mitchell, who wrote between 1929 and 1984. Georgette Heyer, who was writing detective fiction as well as the Regency romance she's known for. And Christiana Brand, who was writing detective fiction between the 1941 and the 1950s. So let me tell you just a little bit about each one of the Queens of Crime. The first, Dorothy L. Sayers, was born in Oxford, England in the 1890s. She was an only child, and her father, who was a chaplain and a rector, started teaching her Latin when she was 6 years old. To say that she was bright is an underestimation. She later studied at Somerville College, Oxford, and in 1920 was one of the first women awarded a degree at the university. She's most well known for her detective mysteries featuring Peter Wimsey, an amateur sleuth who, despite being the younger brother of a duke, loves to poke his nose into the various mysteries that come his way. Sayers paid the bills by working at S.H. Benson's, one of the largest advertising agencies in London. She was a copywriter from 1922 to 1929. Her experience as a copywriter gave her background information for some of her books, particularly for Murder Must Advertise, which is actually set in an advertising agency. Her first detective book, Whose Body, was published in 1923, and she wrote detective novels, short stories, as well as stories with other members of the Detection Club. She also published poetry, drama, essays, and criticism, as well as translating multiple works, including Dante's Divine Comedy. She had one son born out of wedlock before her marriage to Mac Fleming. She was a founding member of the Detection Club and later became president of the club from 1949 to 1957. She died in 1957.
I just want to pause and say how cool it was that she was one of the first women awarded a degree
I know.
at Oxford.
Mhm.
Yes.
I feel like that's like
Yes.
a moment, because that really was like during that time when I was doing research on all this, that it was like an emergence of women writers getting like recognition,
Right.
but also in like academia as well. So.
Well, and one of the things that happened with that is they would earn the degree but wouldn't actually get the degree. Like they would do all of the coursework and everything else, and they weren't actually, some of them were not awarded degrees until years after they finished.
Interesting.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
I feel like that's a whole other topic.
yeah, it is a whole nother topic.
I wanted to note that because
Yes.
Oxford, especially during like the 30s and 40s,
Yes.
we did a lunch and learn with the Inklings.
Yes.
And
That's
you
right.
had like their informal, and I'll get
Yes.
into that later. But I'm like, interesting how she got a degree.
Yes,
One of
she
the
was
first.
a brilliant woman.
Mhm.
And one of the things that, today when we think about detective fiction, people are talking about how this is great that people are no longer writing just these puzzle mysteries, that they're writing these mysteries with fully fleshed out human beings and they're literary and everything else. Well, let me just tell you, Dorothy L. Sayers was doing that in the 1930s. In fact, one of her books, Gaudy Night, is about that very topic. That part of the book is about that topic. And so if somebody tells you that they didn't used to write literary mysteries, tell them they are wrong. That Dorothy L. Sayers started that way back when.
Well, there was also a structure, and I'll touch on that later to that too. So,
Yes.
But anywho.
Great. Our next queen of crime is Agatha Christie. So Agatha Christie is like hands down the most prolific of these women. She wrote 66 detective novels, 14 short story collections, and 25 plays, including The Mousetrap, which set a world record for the longest continuous run at one theater. It ran for more than 21 years and then changed to another theater and continued playing, and it only closed down because of COVID. But
Wow.
She was born also in the 1890s in England. She was educated at home by her mother and turned to writing early in life. During World War I, she worked as a nurse, and that is also when she began writing detective fiction. Her work as a nurse actually gave her the background in poisons that you will see in her books over and over again over the ensuing years. Her first book, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, was published in 1920 and featured Hercule Poirot, who is probably her most famous detective, although she had several others. One of her other detectives is Miss Jane Marple, an elderly lady who solves crimes. Then there's Superintendent Battle. There are about 5 books that feature him. There's Tommy and Tuppence. They have several books as well. And then a whole bunch of standalone novels as well. In 1926, something very controversial happened. Christie was in the middle of a possible divorce with her husband. They were estranged. And one day she just disappeared. And for several days, nobody could find her. In fact, there was a nationwide manhunt looking for her, thinking that maybe foul play had happened. They found her car abandoned on the side of a road. They couldn't find her anywhere. She was finally found several days later under an assumed name in a hotel, and she was listed under the name of her husband's mistress. It's still a mystery as to how she got there and whether she remembered anything or actually had amnesia, as she said she did. She went to her grave with that. Nobody ever knew.
Too.
Nobody ever knew what actually happened with that.
Whether
it was something that she thought up herself, whether it was something that somebody put her up to, whether she really had amnesia, we don't really know.
There's gotta be a piece of paper somewhere, though.
There was a movie years and years and years ago with one idea. There is a book, The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, that came out the last few years by Marie Benedict, which is one idea from somebody what might have happened, but nobody really knows. It's a real life mystery about this mystery writer.
Well, and Doctor Who even did an episode on that
right.
with a science fictional reason that she disappeared,
Right,
of course.
right. And
I
there's
didn't know
one
this.
of the Vanessa Redgrave starred in a film that talked about the possibility that maybe she was thinking about killing the mistress. So yeah, so there's lots of theories. Nobody knows.
I'm just the fact that she assumed the name
I
of the
know.
hotel.
I know, isn't that
She
incredible?
knew.
So anyway, she married twice. So after her divorce, she was a single mother for a while. She and her first husband had a daughter. And then after that, she married an archaeologist and she started traveling with him. So her travels with Max gave her the background information for several of her novels. Many are set around archaeological digs out in the Middle East, in Egypt, and places like that she learned a lot about when she was traveling.
And how to bury a body.
And how to bury a body. Yeah, exactly. She was also a founding member of the Detection Club along with Dorothy L. Sayers and was president from 1957 until 1976. She died in 1976, and her books have sold over 1 billion copies. She is the most sold in the English language.
That is
her
crazy.
Books. Isn't that crazy?
She had an interesting life, though. I did not know about the hotel, but the fact that she was a nurse in World War I, I think there's something to say, women in wartime during that time, because most of when the queens of crime were operating was during and after World War One, I
Yes.
believe, when that was happening.
They were writing pretty much between the two wars. So the golden
Yeah.
age of detective fiction starts. Depending on there's an argument, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. There's an argument of exactly where it starts, but right around World War One
Okay.
is about the start of it. They're starting to write in the 1920s between the two wars. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why this became an enormously popular genre during that time period, and we can talk about that in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Marjorie Allingham.
Almost there.
So she is a little bit different. She is a little bit younger. For instance, she was born in a west suburb of London in 1904. She said she was born to a family, all of whom scribbled, penned, and composed in some fashion or another. She said, my father wrote, my mother wrote, all the weekend visitors wrote, and as soon as I could master the appallingly difficult business of making the initial marks, so did I. She began writing at the age of 15 and actually had her first commission from somebody to write something in her teens, and she continued in various forms until her death in 1962. She studied drama and speech training while continuing to write. Her first novel was published in 1929, and her most famous character, Albert Campion, was first seen as a side character in The Crime at Black Dudley, but he was the main character in almost 20 novels and numerous short stories. Oof. She also wrote novellas, radio plays, a stage play, and many nonfiction works, including an autobiographical account of her wartime experiences in an English country village.
Wait, so are radio plays like the prequel versions of audiobooks?
Yes,
but
and
in
no.
like play form.
They're
Sometimes.
like dramatizations that we have now. You know how you'll
television
have an audio dramatization,
like
of
a
book?
Graphic audio for a book.
No, it's like
when they say full cast audio.
Yeah, they'll have a full
That's
cast
what I was
audio.
thinking.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was similar to that, except they were actual plays that they would because it was pre-television.
Yeah.
So for people who couldn't actually go to London, for instance, and see a play on stage, or couldn't go to one of the theaters, they could hear it on the radio.
And it's something that the U.S. had as well, as they had a lot of radio shows, very popular.
Radio
dramas was very big. You have all these detective ones, and even some superheroes. And sometimes comics were made, like Little Orphan Annie was eventually a radio show, if I believe correctly. But it's something that even
the Lone Ranger.
Oh, the Lone Ranger, yes.
I remember listening to the Lone Ranger when I was a kid on the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's something that the UK has continued. They still make different adaptations and shows today, but we've pretty much dropped it off, except for sometimes podcasts.
Isn't it BBC4 that does that a lot?
They do a lot. Yeah, they have a few channels that do some really good ones.
That's okay.
No, I don't.
So the closest we have are the full cast audiobooks anymore.
Yeah.
For the US.
So awesome.
So Allingham died of breast cancer in 1966, and her husband, Philip Youngman Carter, finished her final Campion book after her death at her request. Yeah. Nao Marsh is the only one of the Queens of Crime not born in England. She was born in 1895 in Christchurch, New Zealand. She studied painting in the Canterbury College School of Art in New Zealand before spending several years as part of a touring acting company. So apparently her mother's family were really big into amateur dramatics, and she caught the bug. And so when she finished, instead of working, as a painter necessarily, she went touring and kind of, I think, did some of the artwork for their handbills and things like that, but actually, help with sets and things like that. She toured with them throughout New Zealand for a while. In 1928, she decided to visit England with some friends and planned to stay indefinitely because she fell in love with the area. She and a friend opened a shop in London in order to make ends meet, and it was there that she penned her first detective novel. She wrote an essay called Birth of a Sleuth, where she described how she invented her protagonist, Roderick Allen. She said, he was born with the rank of Detective Inspector CID on a very wet Saturday afternoon in a basement flat off Sloane Square in London. The year was 1931. She wrote about him because she had read some of these others. She had read Agatha Christie. She had read Dorothy L. Sayers. I don't know if she had read Allingham. but she had read several of these detective fiction, and she thought, I can do that too. But she wanted to do it with somebody, with a protagonist who wasn't an aristocrat, who wasn't like, you know, related to a possible royal family like Campion. This was just a police guy, just somebody, you know, yes, he was in the Foreign Service for a while, and his brother was, but they were civil servants. They weren't, you know, big and important.
Like a Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah,
but
like
more
Sherlock
official
Holmes,
police versus private detective.
Right. But,
nosy
well,
busybody.
I think that was part of it, but part of it was just that he was an ordinary person. Okay. So, and he, like all of the rest of these protagonists, when they first start writing them, are pretty two-dimensional.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah. So what happens is that you see all of one of the reasons why these particular authors are still read is as you read through the books, they grow as human beings, and you watch that happen, and they become more and more interesting. And as you pick up the backstory, you see what's going on in their lives. It makes a big difference in how you view them. Agatha Christie, a good bit less than the others. She was very, very much the mistress of the puzzle detective story, but you still see some of it. So anyway, Marsh had, you know, been reading these detective novels, and she just decided one day to write one herself. So she goes out to the local shop, she bought some notebooks and some pencils and started immediately. And after a few months of writing in the evening, she had a finished novel. Can you imagine? Those of us who write are just like, oh, I wish.
I wish.
Soon afterwards, though, her father had wrote to her asking her to return to New Zealand because her mother was very ill. But before she left, she gave the novel to a publisher friend. The title was A Man Lay Dead. And the publisher was like, oh, this is great. And he published it in 1934 after she moved back to New Zealand. So she stayed in New Zealand because after her mother's death, she lived with her father. And, you know, kind of was there to take care of him. She was an only child. And that was a pretty typical thing to do if you were an unmarried woman in that day. Even though she lived permanently in New Zealand, and after her father died, then she inherited that house and she lived there the rest of her life. But she continued to write mystery novels set in England. So this required her to return to London periodically. She went back in 1937, but after she went back to New Zealand, unfortunately, as a result of being in New Zealand, the war started. And so she wasn't able to get back until after the war. But she went back and forth between the two countries the rest of her life. While in England, she participated in London's literary life. She made friends with other authors such as Dorothy L. Sayers, and she became a regular visitor to the detective club meetings with other mystery writers.
Wow.
Yep. So she was really interesting. She lived the longest. She died after all the rest of them. She lived a very, very long life. There's a lot of controversy with her because she never married. She liked to dress in men's clothing. But she swore to the end of her life that she was not a lesbian.
Interesting.
Yeah. So she had a really good friend who lived in a nearby, like back-to-back gardens in New Zealand. But she always said they were just platonic friends, and she said that. And a lot of her letters and journals were destroyed, so we don't know. She purposely destroyed them, so we don't know. Yeah, so we don't know. This was her decision. This is what she wanted to say. There are people who make suppositions, but there is nothing to go with. Just like Agatha Christie, she took that to her grave.
Yeah, the days.
Dorothy L. Sayers, her illegitimate son, did not know she was actually his mother until after she died.
Wow. So
a lot of these women had secrets. Marjorie Allingham's the only one that I didn't have a big secret. The rest
that we know about.
Yeah. So the other three, they had big secrets that they took to their graves.
Interesting. Yep. Being a woman during that time, it just makes me wonder, like, what was like going on, but I won't. Anywho, so when we talk about detective fiction, just like brief like history, like what do we mean by that? Not detective
club
fiction per se, but the club. Yeah, thank you.
They're in a club.
Yes. So I almost think of it similar as like the Inklings. The Inklings was like an informal gathering at Oxford kind of around that same time, funny enough, like the 30s to late 40s. And the Detection Club was founded in 1930 and was a group of British mystery writers, which included, like we've talked about, Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers, a couple others like Ronald Knox, Freeman Wills Crofts, Arthur Morrison. The list goes on. I don't know. Do you see any names in here that stick out to you?
Yeah, Baroness Emma Orgsby, who also wrote the Scarlet Pimpernel novels.
That one is.
That's why you recognize that name.
And
Yeah.
G.K. Chesterton, who was the first president.
Oh.
Yeah, for the Father Brown mysteries. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, the purpose of the club was not only to help each other with technical aspects in their individual writings, but they also wrote a number of works together, so collaboratively, with members of the club contributing one or more chapters in turn. And of course, I already mentioned Agatha Christie served as president from 1957 to 1976. The current president, funny enough, is Martin Edwards, who's been sitting since 2015. And at the moment, there's currently roughly about 60 members. So unlike the Inklings, was just like an informal gathering, the Detection Club, I should say, they have like a president, they have like a structure and like all of that. It's a very exclusive club currently.
It's always been that way, actually. Yes, it was invitation only.
Oh.
Yep.
Well, the whole purpose of the group was to help eliminate inconsistencies in mysteries during the time the genre was becoming popular. They kind of wanted to make sure clues were all there for readers and not just brought about the last minute. So during like those 20s and 30s, as I'm sure you know, there was a lot of inconsistencies in mysteries, and they really helped kind of create a structure, which is where you can sometimes get the two-dimensional characters, common setting of like being isolated in like an area, because that helps
locked room.
Well, or at like a getaway home where there isn't a whole lot of people. Like you couldn't really have like a type of mystery in London with how many people there are. You had to have like
a limited suspect pool.
Yes. And I think with that, it helped create kind of a structure, because when you have people reading these books, the reader wants to be in on the clues or like the puzzle. And they don't want towards like the last 5 pages of the story, some random person showing up you're like, what?
It feels like it's cheating, which leads kind of into why they created an oath along with their
Did
own 10 commandments. I
you?
will like to read the oath, please. So, do you all promise that your detectives shall well and truly detect the crimes presented to them using those wits which it may please you to bestow upon them, and not placing reliance nor on making use of divine revelation, feminine intuition, mumbo jumbo, jiggery pokey, coincidence, or act of God? No cheating.
No cheating.
Although some of them did break that sometimes.
They didn't break that so much as they broke the rules.
Yes,
So there are 10 rules, and they are well known to have. Agatha Christie particularly would break them all the time.
But you
President
know
of the club breaks the rule.
Knowingly break the
Yes,
rule. But you at least have to know the rule.
You have to know the rules to break the rules, exactly.
Yes. So the golden age of detective fiction, the 20s to 30s. The golden age of mystery and detective fiction is typically defined as the period between the 2 world wars, primarily in the 20s and 30s. The era is noted for establishing the convention of the mystery genre, heavily influenced by the Queens of Crime, of course. And during this time, the clue puzzle format, which you discussed earlier, emerged as a popular structure where both detective and reader are presented with the same clues to solve the mystery. The stories often took place in a closed setting, as we just discussed, such as country houses, which fostered a limited pool of suspects. Key themes included fair play, where authors adhered to rules preventing them from concealing clues from the reader, as well as depictions of murder as seemingly respectable individuals. So they really made the bad guys, I guess, is what I'm hearing.
Overall,
I don't think they really had like a gray. I feel like we now have like the morally gray characters. Unless Sherlock Holmes is considered.
No, I think there was enough morally gray characters.
There were morally gray characters, and sometimes,
or there are reasons behind it.
Most of the time, they got arrested or something happened to them, but every once in a while, they would get away with it. Yeah.
Well,
if it's
I'm thinking about one Agatha Christie in particular where they don't got away with it. They get away with it.
Yeah.
Well, while most of the pool was British writers dominating, American authors also contributed significantly to the mix of classical and hard-boiled styles emerging. Impact on today.
Yeah. Well,
I feel like
there's a lot.
They really created what's like modern mystery.
Yeah, they set up a lot of the modern mystery, a lot of the tropes that we use, whether they're used or parodied, or twists. You have of course, the hard-boiled film noir detective types. We have now the dramatic domestic thrillers, which is another limited pool in a way.
Yeah. What about Frida McFadden?
Frida McFadden, I would definitely say that's the domestic thrillers. Okay. I don't know how much she pulls from them, of course, because there's always a twist and she always cheats. So know that going in.
That's true.
And yeah, there's been a lot of just a whole bunch of adaptations made, whether there's the plays that they're originally written, like Christie wrote a lot of plays as is, but some of hers have been adapted, television shows, movies, there's been a lot.
Just recently, the Seven Dials mystery. So the book is different than the show.
Yes.
So if you want, there's an old PBS version or BBC version that is similar to the book, but if you don't mind that, it is very well done. It's on Netflix. Very well done. We don't have it yet in the system, but the Seven Dials mystery is one of the superintendent battle.
Okay.
Agatha Christie's. And so there is a superintendent battle, and I'm interested to see if they do any more with him.
Yeah. For example, one of my favorites, the adaptations has always been the Hercule Poirot with David Suchet. That's a really good series.
Yes.
Overall, they stick pretty faithfully to the stories. And to be fair, there is some stuff they do have to work with when they're modernizing and adapting these stories. A lot of them do use language we would not use today. So know that going in. That said, as tough a subject that is, if you would like a good one that delves into the biographies that both acknowledges it and deals with it. Lucy Worsley does a really good one on Agatha Christie, and then you can look up on the others. So while we really like the stories, we know that there's going to be certain things that come up. It was kind of that globalization, but not global enough to appreciate that this is not how we really should be talking about each other.
It's a problem with anytime you read older literature. It's going to have things like that we recognize as being inappropriate. Some publishers have taken some of it out these days. Some have not. So it just depends. And
I think that's a whole debate in and of itself.
Whether or not I know, but they've changed the name, for instance, of Agatha Christie's, and
then there were none.
Then there were none.
That one actually got changed twice.
Yes. So it got changed twice because both of the first two original titles were offensive to certain people groups. So you see that, you recognize that it's wrong. You can decide not to read it as a result if you want to, and that is fine. But if you are going to read it, just go in understanding that you're going to run up against things. Christie was particularly that way. The other ones weren't as much, but yeah, that's unfortunate, but true.
Yeah.
So, I know some of the adaptations are fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Really well done. The Joan Hickson Miss Marples are great. Love those. There was a trilogy of Dorothy L. Sayers. There haven't been a whole lot of Dorothy L. Sayers, but the trilogy with Strong Poison, Half His Carcass, and Gaudy Night was really good. So, all right. So maybe we should end this by talking about what our favorites for some of these authors are.
Or recommendations.
And recommendations. So, Michelle,
I'll say I already started. If you're reading Ngaio Marsh, my favorite was Artists in Crime. That was really fun. Which is when you said she went to school for art. I'm like, Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
And actually, she does another one. Roderick Allen investigates a stage one, which I cannot for the life of me remember
There's
right
several
now.
of
There's a
those,
few.
actually. Yeah,
Those were
my
good.
favorite is that. Yeah.
And then, I mean, for Agatha Christie, it's hard to go wrong with Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the first ones that I read out of all of them.
Okay.
And then I forgot that I read it. So when I watched I was listening to an audiobook adaptation, and I was like, I know what's going to happen. Wait a minute. I know this plot line. Oh, I read it already.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm not like a mystery reader, but I do recommend The Queens of Crime by Marie Benedict, because she did a bunch of research into these women, and she kind of fictionalized some of their stories and gave like a fun plot line for some of like the secrets and stuff of their
So she has them solve a crime, right? Together?
Yes, I believe so. So that's what
Yes, she does. Mm-hmm.
Yep, highly recommend. And then, of course, The Mystery of Mrs. Christie that Joy mentioned earlier.
So fascinating. If
those...
you want one of the suppositions of what Agatha Christie was actually doing during that time period.
Yes.
I think you brought some special ones, haven't you, Joy?
Yeah, you have some stories.
Yeah, so I do have stories. So these Agatha Christie are just a few of the ones that I bought when I was 17 years old in a library sale for 10 cents a piece. I bought about 40 or 50 of them and fell in love with Agatha Christie. And it was later that I discovered Dorothy L. Sayers. And so I have all of her books. So I don't have all of Agatha Christie's. There are 66 plus. I don't have all those, but I do have all of Dorothy L. Sayers in various versions. And then, so Gaudy Night is my very, very favorite of Dorothy L. Sayers. It's later in the series. I wouldn't start there. I would start either with her very first one, Whose Body, just understanding that Peter Wimsey is not very well developed in the first few. If you want to start when he's better developed, I would start with Strong Poison. That would be a better place to start. Agatha Christie, Five Little Pigs, one of the Poirots, is my very favorite. And the adaptation is wonderful with David Suchet. It's wonderful. Yes. Why Didn't They Ask Evans is one of her standalones, and it's really fun. I really like that one. Marjorie Allingham, Trader's Purse, hands down, is my favorite of her Campion novels. With her, I would definitely start with. I would probably start with the very beginning one of Marjorie Allingham's, only because you follow Campion along, and it's a good idea to kind of follow him as he develops, because the characters repeat. Nao Marsh, Killer Dolphin, which is also set in a theater, and Shakespeare comes into it.
That's a good one.
And then The Clutch of Constables is wonderful, and that's about his wife, who is an artist, and it's absolutely marvelous. It's set on a boat, so there you have that little cast of characters.
Yes. Control.
Yeah, so you could start with Nao Marsh with the very first one, A Man Lay Dead. Alan is only a side character there. If you want him, you can start with the second one, Enter a Murderer, which is also set in a theater, and he's the main character in that one. So Poirot, you can really start anywhere. You can start with the very first one she wrote, The Mysterious Affair of Styles. You can kind of jump in, because he doesn't develop as much. You can kind of jump around with Sayers. With Christie. But I would definitely with Nao Marsh or Marjorie Allingham, I would probably start at the beginning of their series. Yeah.
It's almost nice though when you have a character who's not like fully like all this development, because then you can jump around.
Yes.
And kind of start
Agatha
wherever.
Christie, you can pretty much read any way you want.
That's nice.
The only thing I would say with Poirot and Marple is that you would start, and also Tommy and Tuppence, start with the first one and read the last one last, because it actually matters.
Yeah. Definitely for some of those. Yeah. Well, with that, we're going to thank everyone for joining us at today's Lunch and Learn again. So thank you, Joy and Megan. And
thank you, Michelle.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. And we will have a linked document with some of our, not document, but book list for things that are in the library's collection, as well as potentially a few good websites to check out.
Just some nice
thanks
articles
again.
and stuff.
Thanks for joining us.